Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Packers Unscripted from Packers.com. I am Mike Spofford, joined as always by my trusted colleague Wes Hodkiewicz, coming to you here from our studios at Lambeau Field. Back on the air, Wes. Packers Unscripted is back, and this is a somewhat historic episode of sorts, and I will let you explain what I mean by that.
Well, first and foremost, big thank you to our producer behind the cameras here, Craig Schillbauer, our noble leader, who is stepping in because Matt Arvin, affectionately known as Marvin, I should say, get his name right. Matt was with us for the first 9 seasons of Packers Unscripted in some shape or form. Obviously, Zach Budd did a tremendous job this past year as our producer as well. Matt moved on to a new phase of his life, going back home to Michigan. We miss him dearly here at Lambeau Field. We press on without him. But Michael, you and I, 10 seasons now of Packers Unscripted going in. We're not with Marv, but he is with us in spirit.
He absolutely is, and we'll have to get his critique of his boss Craig's first producer run at our fancy little show here. But, boy, we have a lot to talk about, a lot of ground to cover, because we did take a bit longer break than we normally do. But before we dive into everything that's been going on in the offseason here, I just have to get your thoughts, because it really was to this point, once in a lifetime, and hopefully not much more than a once in a generation type of thing. But Green Bay hosting the NFL draft. All I'll say to start off is that I think everything about it exceeded the expectations that anyone could have had. It was absolutely tremendous. It was phenomenal in every respect, not only for the local team, but for the entire production. I like to call it now the NFL's traveling roadshow. I mean, that really is what the NFL draft is. And I thought the city of Green Bay, the fans, and everybody in this organization, outside this organization that was involved in it, absolutely hit it out of the park.
Mike, you and I could fill an entire episode of Packers Unscripted just giving kudos to the men and women of this organization, Discover Green Bay, everybody in the community that made this thing happen. In my wildest dreams, Michael, I don't think I could have envisioned a scenario in which the NFL draft would have been any better than what we had in Green Bay. Certainly, there were the theatrics on the stage. 2 Packer players end up walking, 2 future Packers end up walking across that stage and embracing Roger Goodell. But the alumni that were involved, just the amount of people, 600,000 people over the 3 days. I mean, just blowing the roof off of what the expectations were in terms of how many folks were going to be coming out here. I was chatting with people. I'll never forget this. On Thursday afternoon, I was eating my lunch inside our little promenade area, our little commissary, if you will.
Okay.
And people were coming up to me saying, man, do you think folks will show up? Like, what is this going to be like? Is it going to look empty because you have the Titletown, the Lambeau Field, the Resch Center campus? And I remember within hours of looking out at that same area as that sea of people is out there in the draft theater and in the general admission area behind it, I could not have thought of a better experience. My son was able to come down and check it out a little bit. So many tremendous people involved in it, and I didn't want to jinx it over the 3 days, but I remember talking with our VP of security, Doug Collins, a huge credit to him and his staff for everything they did, and telling him, I'm like, I could not have envisioned this going off any better than it did. And hopefully we will see it here again someday.
That shot, the panoramic overhead type shot, if you will, of the stage, the crowd on the Lambeau Field grounds, whether you're shooting it with the stadium in the background or with the stage as the background, whichever angle, that picture will go down as an iconic image in the history of this city and in the history of the state, quite frankly, the entire state of Wisconsin. It was absolutely tremendous. But we have so much Packers football to talk about. There is so much that has happened since we last signed off free agency, the draft. Here's what I want to do. I think this is the best way to break it down.
You're the boss.
To try to get it into one show here, and then we'll see where our shows the rest of the spring go from there. But when you look at what happened with the Packers in free agency and in the draft combined, for me it breaks down into 4 position groups looking extremely different compared to where the Packers were at the end of last season. 2 positions on offense, 2 positions on defense. So I want to start on the offensive side because to me, those 2 positions are wide receiver and offensive line. I'll let you choose which one you want to go with first, but I think those are the 2 position groups on the offensive side of the ball that are undergoing the most transition here as the Packers go from 2024 into 2025.
1,000%. And realistically, when you look at quarterback, running back, tight end, it's pretty much the same outlook at all those positions. So It's sort of this dichotomy between some pretty drastic shifts and pretty much business as usual. Packers, at the time in which we're taping this, haven't even added another quarterback to that room since the end of the season. So be that as it may, I will take over with the offensive line here. And the main reason I'll do that is I felt like this was the first domino that really felt with the Packers offseason in how the thing's set up for them in the draft.
Yeah.
Aaron Banks is signed. He's brought in, left guard from the San Francisco 49ers. Big, bruising, mauling type guard. That shift, though, ends up moving Elton Jenkins to center as Josh Myers now goes and signs with the New York Jets. So a huge seismic change that I remember we were talking about this at the NFL owners meetings, and there were some rumblings about could Elton be moving to center. And Brian Gutekunst and Matt LaFleur both said when we were down at West Palm Beach, they feel like he can be an all-pro there. And he's been a 2-time Pro Bowl left guard, a selfless guy, a guy that has done everything the Packers have asked of him throughout these first 6 years that he's been in Green Bay. Well, now he's going to make this move back to center where he was, an all-SEC type player there at Mississippi State before he got drafted by the Packers in the 2nd round. Then you have Aaron Banks. And I'm thinking in my head about what this interior line could look like. Because whether it is, Sean Ryan or Jordan Morgan or now Anthony Belton, who was added, the Packers' interior of that line is going to be about as big as I can ever recall, height and mass-wise. I mean, these are big dudes that are going to be clogging up the middle of that area and trying to, create some space there for Josh Jacobs. So deeper, stronger, and more athletic, I think, is sort of the overall feel of this group now that Belton's been added in the 2nd round. And the Packers got really fortunate last year, Michael, in that they didn't have a huge injury on the offensive line up until Elton in the playoffs in that game against Philadelphia.
Right.
Other than just Jordan Morgan's shoulder issues, most of that line started together all season, other than I think Josh Myers missed 1 game with a wrist. So you can't always count on that. So whether it's the competition that's going to push that group forward for the starting 5 in training camp or the guys who might step up if somebody does go down, I think Brian Gutekunst has done a really good job of fortifying that group and giving Matt LaFleur and that coaching staff a lot of options.
Yeah, and we'll have to see. A 2nd-round pick was invested in Anthony Belton, as you mentioned. Massive 335-pound offensive tackle from NC State. We'll see probably when we get to OTAs where exactly the Packers are going to begin his NFL journey and where he'll be competing to crack the lineup, whether that be at tackle or guard. They feel really good about his ability to play tackle or guard on either side of the line of scrimmage. The other piece of offensive line news that we got this offseason is both Brian Gutekunst and Matt LaFleur have mentioned that Jordan Morgan, last year's 1st-round draft pick, whose rookie season unfortunately was cut short by the shoulder injury, which required surgery, and he's been in the recovery process there, by all accounts going well. But he not only will be competing with Sean Ryan at right guard, which is where he started, which is where he began his NFL journey last year as that rookie 1st-round pick, but he's also going to be competing with Rasheed Walker at left tackle. So Rasheed Walker entering a contract year. He'll be a 4th-year player this year, a previous 7th-round pick who has stepped in at left tackle and done a yeoman's job, as they say, with not only in the run game, but protecting Jordan Love's blind side. But now last year's 1st-round pick is going to be competing with Walker at left tackle. So with Belton in the mix and then Morgan maybe competing at left tackle or right guard, it's going to be interesting to see just where things are at the start of training camp when the pads go on, but then also where training camp finishes and when the Packers are really getting ready for that week 1 lineup in September.
For sure. And they obviously, we've seen it with Jenkins. You've seen it with Zach Tom. There's versatility. There's guys you can move around depending on how injuries shake out. But realistically, I think one of the things the Packers got really fortunate with last year is that Rasheed Walker did get through the whole season fine, starting all those games and being available. But it isn't always going to work out that way. And you saw what happened with David Bakhtiari when he had his injury and the knee that just kind of kept lingering and lingering and lingering. You need to have a plan B available to them. So not only is Morgan going to be a guy that pushes Walker for that job, but as Walker enters the last year of his rookie contract, Tom at this point entering the last year of his rookie contract, it's things that Packers have to keep an eye on too as far as the future is concerned, with both Morgan and Belton potentially being involved with those positions as well.
Yeah, well, at the wide receiver position, the other one to discuss here on offense, we've sat here over the years many times during the spring, during the summer, talking about wide receiver competitions, and it's an annual rite of passage in Green Bay that there is always competition in that room. But I'm telling you, Wes, I don't know if the competition is going to be any fiercer than it will be this summer, because while the Packers will be waiting for later in the fall when Christian Watson comes back from his knee rehab, which by all accounts so far is going well, and that's all good to hear. But you've got Jaden Reed, Romeo Doubs, Dontavian Wicks coming back. The Packers have added a first-round pick in Matthew Golden, a third-round pick in Savion Williams to that mix. You're also returning Bo Melton and Malik Heath, guys who have, they've had their ups and downs in terms of practice squad active roster, but we've seen them play and contribute to Matt LaFleur's offense, and they've caught passes from Jordan Love in some big situations. And then McCole Hardman was added from Kansas City as a free agent wide receiver, possible return man. We'll see how that sorts itself out. But wow, I mean, the collection of guys there with the potential, I guess you'd call it the trading deadline acquisition down the road of Christian Watson re-entering that room when he gets healthy. This wide receiver position is going to be something to watch right from day one of OTAs, quite frankly.
Yeah, and I'm sure Jason Vrabel's a kid in a candy shop right now with all these guys, and obviously Ryan Mahaffey in that room too. And so many guys you can develop out of this. And certainly, first and foremost, you have Dobbs, you have Reed, obviously, as you mentioned, Melton, Wicks, Heath, all these guys are still young. They're still developing and still looking for those breakout type years. But being able to put in a first-round pick, the first time in 23 years the Packers have drafted a receiver in the first round, somebody with Golden's just prodigious speed, a guy that is not just 4.29 fast, but also ran the fastest 10-yard split. I mean, this guy's quick as well.
Yeah.
At his size, being able to master the route tree. And I think the thing that has impressed me the most, Mike, and you and I have continually talked about this in the weeks after the draft here, but this is a guy that challenged himself. He was at Houston. He goes to Texas, and his stats get even better. This is a guy that came on really strong for the Longhorns the second half of last season because nothing was given to him early on as soon as he made that transfer. That was a team that was competing for a national championship. They already had a lot of talent on that roster before he got there. And then Savion Williams, you and I saw him at the rookie minicamp, and the Packers, they weren't throwing passes. We weren't running elaborate routes, but this guy, it's 6'4", 6'3", 220 pounds. The comment was made on the sideline amongst the reporters. I mean, he is a grown man.
Yeah.
And when you still run in the 4.4s at that size, and certainly there's some wrinkles to iron out a little bit with his game. There were some drops and things like that at TCU, but all around, I mean, you look at what the Horned Frogs did. They wanted to feed him the football however they needed to get it to him. The guy threw a pass last season. I mean, this is a playmaker, and when you're looking at guys from that level of football and you have these type of programs building and tailoring their offenses around them, it shows you that the raw talent is there. And for Matt LaFleur and that coaching staff to be able to develop this and build game plans around it, I think the most dangerous thing about this offense, and we said it last year, but it's still true, is that on any given down, you don't know which 3 or 4 receivers you're going to see and how they could be utilized. And that is an ultimate weapon for an offense.
Yeah, a couple of things that I'll say about the guys, the 2 draft picks being added to the mix. Savion Williams, you mentioned the 6'4", 220, and when we got our first chance to talk to the draft picks in person on last Friday during the rookie minicamp, I was in the group of reporters that was around Savion Williams, and I was basically standing right next to him, and it sort of hit me that it's like, boy, I mean, not that Jordy Nelson was a small guy, not that James Jones was a small guy, but standing next to a wide receiver who's 6'4", 220, it's like, okay, this is a different type of football player here. This is a different type of offensive weapon than what the Packers normally bring in. And I think in a lot of ways the same can be said for Matthew Golden, because as Matt LaFleur said after the draft, you can't coach 4-2-9, right? I mean, that's what he has. That's what he brings to the table. But the really interesting thing, too, with Golden is that Texas team was bringing in two fairly highly touted transfer receivers from the portal for 2024. It was Matthew Golden coming from Houston, and it was Isaiah Bond, I believe is the name, coming from Alabama. Well, Houston or Alabama, which guy is going to get more attention coming in from the transfer portal? It's the guy from Alabama, right? But eventually, who was the guy who became the number one target for the Texas Longhorns? It was Matthew Golden. His production, the stats, the numbers, all of that bore that out. So a lot of excitement, obviously, about what both of those guys can bring to the table. Two receivers. We've seen Brian Gutekunst double up at positions in the draft before, but two very, very different receivers and different offensive weapons being thrown into the mix here.
And if you want to, I'm not saying you have to, but one member of the Packers media corps did say that Matthew Golden was going to be the pick.
I know. I was gonna let you brag about yourself. You called it. He was your pick.
But
first time in 23 years the Packers drafted a receiver in the first round. First time in 12 years that you've been correct. Because I actually called, although I have to say I was wrong because the Packers ended up taking him in the second round. But I called the Christian Watson pick a few years ago. The Packers ended up getting him at the top of the second round rather than taking him with one of their two first round picks that year. But that was the receiver that I actually pegged, and I got it right, even though it was in the second round. But congrats to you on nailing the Golden pick.
And to be serious about that, though, for a second. The reason why is that the more you learn about this guy, and we've gotten a chance to talk to him now a couple times, and reading his backstory and where he comes from in Houston, which is, he's from, that area of Texas. He stayed home when he originally went. Played at Houston for 2 years.
Went to TCU on a visit, and Savion Williams was the player who was hosting him on his recruiting visit. Ultimately, didn't choose TCU, but he goes back a little ways with Savion.
Small football world, but I mean, this kid has a lot of motivation in Golden, and being able to see him, and obviously he's talked about wanting to get his grandmother's house back. Something it sounds like those wheels have already started turning. It's been abandoned since it was taken away from his family, so that's something they should be able to work out. But then also, just he wears two for his grandma, and listening to his stories about his mother, and then those two kind of raising him, it gives you a lot of reason to pull for this young man. And certainly, once you see him on the field, I mean, this guy's different, and I think Packer fans are going to see that.
Yeah, well, we do need to move on to the defensive side of the ball, and we'll do so right after some sponsor business here. SiriusXM NFL Radio delivers hard-hitting analysis and up-to-the-minute NFL news that true football fanatics need 24/7, 365. And at Cousin Subs, we have something for everyone, like our Wisconsin cheese curds, mac and cheese, golden fries, and creamy shakes, all paired with your favorite sub or sub in a bowl. Cousin Subs, 50-plus years of better. All right, defensive side, the two positions obviously that are going to look different here in 2025, the defensive line and cornerback for Green Bay. Might as well start on the defensive line, and this is sort of the thing I've been throwing it out there, whether it's in Inbox or some other radio shows I've been on. To me, the most interesting thing, because I know there's been all the talk about the pass rush, because yes, the Packers finished 8th in sacks last year, but the pass rush wasn't good enough against the Vikings and the Lions and the Eagles when they needed it. There was all this inconsistency, which Brian Gutekunst and Matt LaFleur have acknowledged. So there's been all this focus on what are the Packers going to do about their pass rush going into 2025. To me, the larger question, or the next question after that, is can the Packers improve the consistency and the reliability of the pass rush without sacrificing the run defense, because the run defense had its highest league ranking in 15 years for the Packers last year. Since 2009, when Dom Capers was in his first year as coordinator, Jeff Hafley's first year as coordinator, the Packers' run defense was one of the top 6 or 7 in the league. So you need to do something about the pass rush, which they spent 4th and 5th round draft picks and a 6th round draft pick for that matter. But can you change things up and get some more improvement and reliability and everything there with the pass rush without sacrificing the run defense? I think that's the question that lingers.
That's the number one thing the Packers have to do, and they also have to do it without TJ Slayton.
Right.
And if you go back to the 2021 draft, I think that was probably the best bang for your buck pick the Packers got with getting Slayton in the 5th round.
Yep.
A guy that I think a lot of people at Florida were kind of hoping he was going to go back for that senior year. He comes out early, and to his credit, this is a guy that had incredible physical gifts and really became an all-around football player by the time his time ended there. It was interesting to me just seeing, and obviously now he's gone and signed with the Cincinnati Bengals, but there were people that were talking about some of these first-round defensive linemen, and they were drawing comparisons. Lance Zierlein had comparisons. I forget which exactly guy it was, but said that his player comp was TJ Slayton. So while he's not the biggest name, he is a big void for this Packers defense, and how they go about replacing him is going to be very critical. Now, that being said, TJ wasn't the biggest pass rushing threat that we've ever seen in a green and gold uniform.
Right.
That's where I think the Packers are trying to find this balance, because it's an interior game and it's an exterior game. It's with those edge rushers as well. How do you incorporate guys like Edgerrin Cooper, being able to use the athleticism of a Quay Walker, get those guys involved? I mean, I think Isaiah McDuffie had a half sack last season. I mean, Jeff Hafley cooked up some really interesting schemes utilizing slot cornerbacks and inside linebackers. But at the end of the day, when the blueprint was drawn up last offseason, it was about trying to get pressure with 4. It was about trying to maximize what they have and being able to play back in some coverage. And they had to sort of mix that up. So very interested to, 1, figure out what the identity of this year's defense is going to be, and 2, how the edge rushers and the pass rushers are going to be incorporated into that. Certainly, we've heard it time and time again this offseason. Lucas Van Ness has said it himself. I mean, everybody's expecting big things from the former first-round pick. Rashawn Gary, I thought, came on really well at the end of last season. Kingsley Enagbari, certainly Brenton Cox Jr. was kind of a revelation during the second half of the season, finishes with 4 sacks. And now you look at what they did on day 3. Those first 2 picks of day 3, when you had Barron Sorrell out of Texas and Colin Oliver out of Oklahoma State, 2 very different pass rushers, 2 very different body types, but guys that the Packers hope could potentially contribute to this rotation. Huge expectations on that group this season, and I would imagine once we get to training camp, probably the biggest microscopes will be looking at that defensive front.
Yeah, I'm very intrigued. Not to say that I'm not intrigued with Barron Sorrell and what he might do, and we could probably do an entire show on everything that went down in the 4th round on that Saturday afternoon when he was selected. But I'm very interested to see what Jeff Hafley does with a pass rusher like Colin Oliver, 240-pounder. He's only 10 pounds heavier than Edgerrin Cooper, who's an off-ball linebacker, and Oliver was drafted in the 5th round. The Packers felt the value was there with him because as an undersized edge rusher, he can also play off-ball linebacker if you need him to. But Jeff Hafley in that first year, for all the different things that he tried, the Packers didn't really have somebody whose position is edge rusher, but who is a speed guy, a pure speed guy. He's undersized. He's not going to be out there on the edge to defend the run. That's Rashawn Gary and Lucas Van Ness's job. Those are the edge guys that are the 270-plus pounds. Colin Oliver having that designated speed rusher coming off the edge, I'm really interested to see what Hafley ends up doing with him and where his creativity goes in that regard. And then in the 6th round, you bring in Warren Brinson, the defensive tackle, interior defensive lineman from Georgia. He'll be, at times, lining up next to Devontae Wyatt, who, for as much as everybody talks about Lucas Van Ness and Rashawn Gary and trying to continue the growth and the upward trajectory, Devontae Wyatt is a guy who looked like he was headed there last year, and then a pretty nasty ankle injury, kind of threw his whole season, off the rails, so to speak. And he came back, but he wasn't the same guy. And then it took a while to really get fully healthy again. And then we started to see it again, like a little bit more when he was fully past the ankle injury. But Devontae Wyatt is a guy that, especially as a former first-round pick, just like Lucas Van Ness, they're going to be counting on to be that two-way defender on the interior of the defensive line against the run and getting after the quarterback.
Yeah, and Wyatt affects the football game, man. I mean, when he is healthy, I mean, the guy has now, I think, 10.5 sacks the last 2 seasons, and that's not even on a full bandwidth of games and snaps. He's emerging, and I think you can see that. And, listening to some of these guys, I know Kenny Clark has talked about the excitement about Wyatt and where his career is heading right now. But at the same time, they can't all be just jet rushers, right? You need guys that are going to be space eaters, 2 gappers, guys that are going to be able to clog up against the run. And watching the film of Brinson, who is a very selfless player at Georgia, I mean, this guy started 8 games his entire career. They're played in almost, I think, maybe more than 50, 56, something like that, but only started 8. But in terms of their rotation, was so critical to what they did. And when you look at his body type, Mike, 6'5" in that 310-pound range, that is more of the defensive lineman that the Packers have sort of manifested and developed over the last few years. You haven't always had just the 340-pound run stuffers like Slayton. So I think he'll fit really well into the idea of what Green Bay wants to do. But certainly getting, hopefully, a healthy Kenny Clark, a healthy Devontae Wyatt, I think is going to be really critical to what the Packers can do up front.
All right, one more position to address today, and then we'll call it a day for now. Cornerback is a position that has undergone a lot of personnel change, and we still don't know at this point what exactly is going to happen with Jair Alexander. It's been an ongoing story throughout the offseason with no updates as to where this is. So we set aside Jair Alexander for right now, but personnel-wise, the Packers did not bring back Eric Stokes, Corey Ballantyne, or Robert Rochelle. That's a lot of depth in the cornerback room that left. Big free agent signing in Nate Hobbs coming in, almost like in some ways like the second coming of Keyshawn Nixon from the standpoint of a guy who has played a lot of slot cornerback, but the Packers also believe he can play boundary cornerback on a regular basis. Nixon proved last year that he could play both spots. He could move to the outside and certainly hold his own. And then the one, I guess I would say almost 2 additions in the draft, the 7th-round pick in Micah Robinson, and then Jonathan Baldwin coming in from UNLV, a guy that most folks figured was going to be drafted, ended up being undrafted, and the Packers got him, kind of one of those guys at the top of the UDFA class. Will be another guy in the cornerback room as some of this personnel turnover happens.
Brian Gutekunst does not like comparisons with players, but I'm going to offer one with Hobbs. To me, this is the quintessential Zadarius Smith type signing, where the Packers see something in him that maybe wasn't all there on film, but it was enough to entice them to think that this guy could be something really special. Zadarius Smith, when they signed him, had only started 8 games the previous year with Baltimore. He was seen more as that pass rushing specialist. The Packers saw him as an every down defender, the guy that could potentially affect the game, in which he did for those first 2 seasons. Nate Hobbs is in the similar light. Most of his workload, most of his playing time came inside. But when you look at the fact that he was as physical as he was, and he didn't really rack up very many penalties at all while operating in a position where you are constantly under a microscope, Green Bay sees him as having the size and the speed to be able to play outside too. So whether or not you want to travel certain guys with receivers, whether or not you just want to play boundary, or whether it's just a situation where you got to have 5 healthy players, and depending on who's available, you can move him around. Hobbs gives you that type of versatility and that type of latitude. I love everything that he's about. When you listen to his story, where he's come from, and the motivation that has put him to this spot, this is a guy that absolutely positively wants to be the best cornerback in the league, and he feels like he has the ability to do it. Now, that being said, there's a huge question mark there with Jair Alexander. But I feel like this particular year's team is better equipped to handle whether 23 is there or whether 23 is not. You've seen Carrington Valentine and how he's played. I thought he came on really strong last year after having those hamstring issues.
I say when he finally got healthy, we saw the progression of a Carrington Valentine in year 2 that we were thinking we were going to see from the beginning, but he wasn't healthy enough to show it.
Ball hawk, confident, everything you want to see. And when you talk about 7th-round picks, late-round developing cornerbacks, these are the type of guys Green Bay has had success with, a lot of tools, and extremely young. Max Hairston from Kentucky this year, was, I think, ended up being a first-round pick. People were talking about him as potentially a Packers guy. Him and Carrington are the same age. They're both, I think, 2003 birth years.
Okay.
I mean, that just shows you. I mean, Carrington was the youngest guy on this roster his rookie season 2 years ago. Still a lot ahead of him. I think Keyshawn Nixon proved to a lot of people wrong last year that he could play inside, outside. The guy's led the secondaries, led the cornerback room in playing time the last 2 seasons. Oh, and then, by the way, you still have Xavier McKinney on the back end with this thing with an all PFWA safety in Evan Williams. And, check this, a 2nd-round pick in Javon Bullard who can also play the slot. Right. So the Packers have built this room out to a point where I feel like they can handle whatever ebbs and flows are going to be thrown at them. But I think a lot of that did start with Nate Hobbs and is one of those projection signings that Brian Gutekunst has had a lot of success with.
Yeah, I like what you said about the Hobbs signing, because when it comes to the draft, we talk all the time about how it's a crystal ball business and it's about making the investment based on the projection of what you feel the player is going to become. The free agent investment in Nate Hobbs is the Packers making a projection as to what they believe he can become, because even though he is a 5th-year player at this point, he is not a finished product, and the Packers feel that he's got his best football ahead of him, and they're going to try to capture that here in Green Bay.
And like Xavier McKinney last year, who signed at 24 years old as an unrestricted free agent, Nate Hobbs signs with the Packers this year as a 25-year-old unrestricted free agent, so still very much his best years ahead of him.
Absolutely. Well, with that, we will call it a wrap on this comeback edition of Packers Unscripted. Be sure to follow all of our coverage of the team on Packers.com. And as the spring goes on here, we are going to do our best to stick with our 2 shows a week, hopefully through the end of the Packers offseason program, which would be when we get to that mandatory minicamp in the middle of June. And then we'll take another break before we come back for training camp. But with that, for Wes, I am Mike. Thank you for tuning in, everybody, and we will see you next time.